Welcome back to Living Your Best Life. And today I have a story time for you guys. Today the story time is going to be growing up as an immigrant child. So, first of all, I was born here in the United States, but my parents were not. For all those who don't know, both of my parents were born and raised in Jamaica, and they migrated to Brooklyn, New York back in, I'm not really sure of the exact time, but somewhere around the 60s. And they moved to New York, and my mother, she migrated first. She left Jamaica and she moved to upstate New York as a nanny, taking care of two children in a household of a family, a husband and a wife, and my mom was left there to take care of the two kids in New York. So my dad, he came later after my mom got her permit to work in the country. Then my dad came from Jamaica with the rest of my siblings that were already alive. So this is how the story goes. My mom and dad, they worked really hard, coming from when they left Jamaica. My mother used to be a seamstress in Jamaica, working in a shop. She was doing very well monetarily. My father was a police officer in Jamaica, so they left those good paying jobs to come here. Then when my dad came to the United States, he was working at a bank. And at the time, if you guys who do not know, during that time, the racial tension was really high in the 1960s in Brooklyn, New York. And my dad, some kind of way, I guess his charm and his charisma and his personality, he was able to land a job working at Morgan, I think at the time it was Morgan Stanley Chase, or I don't think it was Chase. I think it was just Morgan Stanley Guarantee. That's what I remember my dad telling me it was at the time. So he landed a job working as a teller in the bank in the 60s. And my mom, after she finished that job working and sent for my dad, then they moved into Brooklyn, New York, and all my siblings came to Brooklyn, and that's where I was born after. So because my parents did not have citizenship in the country all along from they came to the United States in the 60s until around, I want to say 1990, 1988, somewhere around that time. They did not have papers. Every year it would come up where they would have to pay to keep a work permit and other things. So you have to pay all these things on a regular basis. My dad would have to pay, my mom would have to pay, on top of all the other expenses. So imagine how it was for my parents. My parents came from a nice warm tropical islands in the Caribbean, warm weather, and then they moved to New York, and it was like, I'm sure it was a shock for them, cold weather. They had never seen snow, separated from their family. Must have been very hard for them, but I appreciate the hard work that my parents did. It wasn't easy for them. A lot of times during those times of racial tension in the 60s, my parents being black, of Caribbean descent, you weren't really looked on. You were just looked at really basically to clean the floors or cook, or the lower pay grades of jobs. That's the only kinds of jobs you were expected to do. But my dad wanted better for himself and for future generations. So my dad got a job working in the bank, and he did that. And my mom was taking care of, I think it was 4 kids at the time. Yeah, 4 kids. And my mom was doing a great job. My mom never let us go to childcare. They always coordinated. Either it was my mom or my dad or one of the siblings. We were always taking care of each other. So we grew up, having a close bond of, uh, keeping close together, taking care of each other. But it was really hard because during those times, every time around that time of the year, it was always when it was time to go back to school that all of these things were due for the government. All the paperwork was always due when it was time to send kids to school. So on top of having to pay rent at the time and food and clothing and all of those things, they still had to try to come up extra with this money. And during that time, I believe that the regular minimum wage at the time was around $2 an hour. And then to try to come up with like over $300 per person on top of rent and food and bills. So it was a lot, and I'm sure it was really frustrating for them. And my parents dealt with that for over 20 years, every year, coming up with the money, taking care of their children. Yeah, until I think it was 1982. My parents decided to migrate to Florida because they were tired of the cold weather. They wanted to get back to their tropical roots, as you could say, warmer climates that would be good for themselves as well as their children. So around that time, they migrated to Florida, and they really liked it. They liked the change, but moving from the north to the south, now they had a whole different things to deal with, because now you have to deal with the southern, I guess you could say, the southern racism, because at the time my parents weren't really thinking, because they weren't going to school at the time. It was us that was going to go to school. And I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years after that is when I first started kindergarten. So I remember how hard it was. I never saw, my parents never complained, because when my dad moved to Florida, my dad started working in construction. So I always saw my dad working 1 or 2 jobs. My mom used to take care of us, all of us children, plus she would always work a full-time job and balance that. But I always saw growing up a hard work ethic, that family was of the most importance, and also to not give up. I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I learned growing up, that it's not easy to be an immigrant. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. It's not easy to be an immigrant, because my mom always said you have to remember that when you come from somewhere else, you are not given things like other people. That my mom always said that you have to work 2 times or 3 times harder than others. You have to be 2 times or 3 times smarter. So be about your books and your education. Take care of yourself. Stay out of people's business, because we always knew that if you got in trouble, you were going to get sent back to Jamaica, because we always knew that we never were here. We were guests. This was not our home until we got papers. So we always knew that growing up. And it was around, I think, 1988 to 1990. I'm not positive about the exact time, but that is when my parents finally went to the courthouse, and they became naturalized U.S. citizens. So from around the 60s to the late 80s, so you could say about 28 years, my parents struggled as immigrants to get better for themselves, their children. And during that time period, my parents purchased 3 homes free and clear, no more mortgage within that 28-year time period. They bought 3 homes. They raised all 10 of their children. You know, they always had a car that they didn't pay any car payments on. It was always a van or a truck or something, but they were really hard workers. And I grew up with that ethic, knowing that life is not easy and you are not given things. You have to work 2 times harder, and it makes me appreciate life a little differently. Not saying that people who were born with the status in the country, that life isn't easy for them either, but when you grow up as an immigrant's child, I could see through my eyes how much harder my parents had to work, because they said, remember, you have to pay for your papers, you have to do this, you're not given things, because certain things that people who with paperwork qualified for, that my parents didn't receive, because at the time all they had was work permits, and later on they got a green card, and then eventually their U.S. citizenship. So I hope you guys appreciate the story time, and if you have any questions about growing up as an immigrant's child, let me know down in the comment section below. Were you an immigrant child? Let me know that too down in the comment section below. I hope you liked the story time, guys. So please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.
Be encouraged, be inspired, be yourself, you will survive.